Hi, good morning, and welcome back to the Keys History and Discovery Center. We're here for our Tuesday morning chat about all things history as relates to the Florida Keys, the Upper Keys in general, and the Florida Keys in particular. I'm Curator Brad Bertelli, and today we'll talk a little bit about some early hurricane history. It seems appropriate as we are in the heat of the hurricane season and just around the corner from Labor Day weekend. Labor Day, September 2nd, 1935, of course, was the day the most powerful hurricane to ever strike North America struck, and it happened to strike here in this area, and we will kind of wind up with that, little talk about that as I move forward. So let's go back to 1835, and 1835 was a really interesting year in the Florida Keys. For one, there was a really odd phenomenon that must have taken people by surprise. I could have only imagined the kind of talk that ensued after the event, because in 1835, Halley's Comet appeared over the Florida Keys and zoomed past it, in the sky. And I imagine that not a lot of people would have understood what was going on. Although there was, it would have been really interesting topic of, water. What are those called when you go to in an office, you go to the water cooler conversation, but without the water cooler back in those days. But that was an interesting phenomenon, and that happens every 75 years. So 2010, I believe, was the last time Halley's Comet appeared, and then it'll appear again long after I am gone. And but that was an interesting year, not just because of Halley's Comet, but that's also the first time that a hurricane strikes the Florida Keys, Key West in particular, and the Florida Keys, that is recorded in print. It appears in a couple documents down in Key West, and it does do significant damage. I know there was one of the particular reports, stories about it, was it causing $500 in damage to fruit trees on Indian Key. $500 in fruit tree damage. It seems like a lot of money when you account for inflation, and that kind of shows you also how much farming or how much agriculture there was on Little Indian Key that had been developed as a wrecking village, not just to compete with Key West, but also to compete with the eye visually and to be an attractive place, which was Jacob Hausmann, the record king of Indian Key. That was his goal, not just to separate from Key West and create his own little empire, but also to make it appealing, which is why he invested so much money in the development of the island, but also in making it a pretty place. The next really significant hurricane would be 1846. I believe that's the Great Havana Hurricane, Category 4, Category 5. It destroys, it topples the lighthouse in Key West, also destroys Sand Key Lighthouse, killing Joshua Appleby, who at that point had become the lighthouse keeper. He had some family visiting him there at the time of the storm, and they were all washed out to sea and never to be seen or heard from again. The island Sand Key is kind of the upper Florida Keys. These islands are largely based on limestone. This is on top of an ancient Florida reef. So these islands up here are really stable. They don't wax and wane with the tide and storms and time, as some of the lower islands do in the Florida Keys. Sand Key is a little spit of land out in the water, and depending on the time of year, over several years, it grows bigger and goes smaller, grows bigger and goes smaller. The same thing happens down in the dry Tortugas, where these islands that are kind of based in sand kind of grow, fluctuate and grow and appear and disappear over time. And then we'll skip ahead to like the early 1900s, where there is a series of hurricanes that really begins to impact life in the Florida Keys for the early pioneers. And this is also during the construction of Henry Flagler's Railroad, which did see several hurricanes impact those years. There was one in 1906 that comes, and really affects the Upper Keys. And not only does it, kind of disrupt the the construction early construction of the railroad, but it also kind of starts to put an end to the pineapple industry, which had been up to that point over the previous 50 years or so had really been a substantial and prominent industry in the Florida and the Upper Keys. And this hurricane 1906. With not so much with the wind, not so much with the with the rain, but with the tidal surge and bringing all of that salt water over the land, kind of disrupted the kind of ruined the land for pineapple production. And at that point, there's talk of a pineapple blight that begins to occur, which is probably the salt-infused land no longer able to support such a that much pineapple industry. And then there's other factors that went into the end of the pineapple industry, and one of these days we will get into that subject as well. But then there's also another event in the 1906 hurricane. 1906 hurricane was during this construction, there was a work camp down on Long Key with a couple of houseboats that had been moored up, and these houseboats, quarter boats, would hold 150 people, workers each to live in, and one of the both of the houseboats, the quarter boats, were kind of ripped from their moorings. One went out in the Gulf and then kind of washed back up on shore, and one of the houseboats ripped away from its mooring and was pushed out to sea, out to Hawks Channel, and it was battered by wind, battered by waves, and it was destroyed and kind of splintered out in the water. Of the approximately 150 people on board, 85 people survived. One of the survivors was a man named Dusenberry. I believe he was an engineer during construction of the railroad. Dusenberry Creek up in Key Largo is named after him. He was picked up out in the shipping channels and kind of lived to tell the story of that quarter boat. One of several to tell the story, but his is one of the more prominently talked about hurricanes or survivor stories. There's also there's hurricanes in 1909, 1910 that disrupt construction of the railroad, construction again, doing a lot of damage. 1926 comes with the Great Miami Hurricane. That is a very large, very, very, very dangerous and damaging hurricane that doesn't affect the Keys a great deal, but it does wash out the Card Sound Bridge at that point, which had been a swing bridge. That's the bridge that connected the mainland to Key Largo. After that event, they actually had to go back and redo the Card Sound Bridge, and it was elevated about 7 or 8 feet to ensure against to help ensure against future hurricanes and washouts. And that bridge is reconstructed, I believe, according to Fern Butters, that into her diary, she remembers it being opening back up on November 11th, 1926, which brings kind of her family into the Florida Keys. Which is another great history that we'll talk about. And for those of you who haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, please go to our YouTube channel. When I talk about Indian Key or the Butters family or some of the other topics, we have all of our lectures are recorded now and placed online there that you can access for free and really get some deeper history. And some of the topics I talk about go into much more depth. When I talk about them here, I'm just kind of glazing over them. But on our YouTube channel, where we have all these things recorded, we go into much deeper depth, and you really might enjoy those as well. It's something that great happened out of this whole COVID nightmare is this pushing us to go digital, to go virtual, and to really bring what we have to offer to a much broader audience, which we're really happy about that. Now, it being September 1st, it only seems fitting to kind of wrap up our talk today with a little bit of information about the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, which struck on September 2nd, 1935, and that, again, the strongest, most powerful hurricane to ever strike North America. A Category 5 hurricane. It was a small, tightly wound hurricane, much like Hurricane Andrew, I believe in 91 or 92, where it was super powerful and winds with in excess of sustained winds in excess of 185 miles an hour, gusts well over 200 miles an hour, bringing just complete devastation to the Upper Keys, to the Upper Matecumbe in particular, and Lower Matecumbe. All these veterans, these hundreds and hundreds of veterans who had been sent to the islands to build bridge projects to eradicate the need for this automobile ferry system that bridged this 40-mile gap in the first version of the Overseas Highway. It's hard to imagine living through a Category 5 hurricane. It's even harder to imagine all these veterans who had been in tents and clapboard cottages, basically that had been slapped together at sea level. Which is why there was, so many, hundreds of people who died in the storm. Even, people who had lived in the Florida Keys, in Alamorada, or the Matecumbe area, for decades and decades, who had gone through hurricanes, who had hurricane structures. The Russell family would utilize one of their like packing houses, where they would strap down the house with cables, so it wouldn't help, blow away, which had proved, very, very beneficial. And a lot of the early families did have a designated house to go to during storms. The problem being with this particular hurricane, of course, was it was unlike anything that had ever struck this area or anywhere else before, and just offered completely eradicated this Alamorada, this Upper Matecumbe community. But again, it was tightly wound. So while it was just tremendously strong here on Upper Matecumbe Key, the eye of the storm passes over Long Key and Lower Matecumbe Key. But in Key West, for instance, all they have is 28-mile-an-hour wind gusts. Tavernier, which is on the southern tip of Key Largo, does suffer a lot of damage, but nothing like down here. Just 30 miles away, such a massive difference between the strength of the storm, even 30 miles away. Where houses up in Tavernier, were destroyed, but a lot of them were pushed off of their bases and off their foundations and kind of floated up. Tremendous damage, but damage in such a different way, and not nearly the loss of life as was kind of concentrated here in this very area, where as many as 500 people died in that storm. And there are as we go on, hurricanes are a way of life here in the Florida Keys and here in the South, in this area in the tropics. One bit of good news right now is the African dust, this dust from the Sahara Desert is kind of blowing over the Atlantic Ocean right now, and that this dry air up in the upper atmosphere does tend to tamper down some of the development of these hurricanes for right now, which is a bit of good news for this time of year. This red dust has been coming over the from the Sahara for thousands of years, and the early pioneers, when they lived here and were farming, they would often talk about these red holes, which were these places in these sinkholes that would fill up with this dust over time, and these were really great places to plant because they were relatively rock free, and they were actually had some depth in soil for where we were able to plant. And so we are going to kick off our fall programming for 2020 and 2021. Going into 2021. And next Wednesday on September 9th, we will do our Cocktails with the Curator. And next Wednesday, we're going to begin to bring in guests for me to sit down and talk with. And next Wednesday, we will have, or a week from tomorrow, we will have we'll have Willie Dry joining us. And he's written an incredible book on the 1935 Labor Day hurricane called Storm of the Century. So please join in, grab yourself a drink, and from 6 to 7 next Wednesday, you can sit back and we'll have some information on our both our website and our Facebook page, and we'll be sending out announcements to register for this event. It is a free event, and you'll be able to ask any questions you want from Willie, who's very knowledgeable about the 1935 hurricanes and weather patterns in general. So we're looking forward to a really good time there. And then from then we're going to get back to our lecture series, which will again be starting September. Yes, September, with a couple of gentlemen who have been in the Florida Keys all their lives and are going to talk about their early, both who were, as small boys, were in the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, and they're going to talk about their memories of the early Tavernier and Upper Keys life. So thanks for tuning in. We will see you again next Tuesday for more deep dives into our local history, and we will see you next week, and then next Wednesday, make sure to mark your calendar and join us for cocktails with the Curator and with myself and Willie Dry. You guys have a great week. Thank you so much.